Hi class. I wanted to take some time to go over with you this week's assignment. My aim is in no way to fail you. I want to see you doing a great job and getting high marks, and I'll do whatever it needs to be done in order to help you to get those grades that you want. So the first thing I want to look at is the assignment itself, and I want to make sure that it's clear. You're going to create a 2 to 3 double-spaced rough draft of your paper. And you're focusing on the literary analysis of the text outlined in last week's assignment. So we talked about theme last week. This is going to be a paper on theme. And hopefully you've chosen one by now. Some of you have told me that you're going to write about freedom. Some of you have told me you want to write about oppression and marriage. Anything, disappointment, anything like that. That's an overarching theme is what you're going to be writing about in the literary analysis. And don't let that term literary analysis distract you. It just means that you're analyzing literature, a work of literature. In this case, it's a short story, The Story of an Hour. Now, the requirements are that you are using an MLA format, including a works cited page. And when you see that you must include a works cited page, this indicates that you've got to have quotes that you're citing in your paper. Now, how many quotes should you have? Obviously, you don't want the quotes to overtake your paper to the point where you're just quoting from the text and you're not saying anything. You want to find that balance between showing and telling. Telling is where you're reiterating your points as they pertain to the theme that you've chosen. And then the showing is where you put the quoted material in, where you put the examples in that help the reader to understand what it is you're trying to convey. In other words, you're proving the points that you're making. If I wanted to use a rough estimate of how many quotes you should have per page, I'd say 2 to 3 are sufficient. Right now, you're not using anything beyond the text itself. But there are some things that students tend to do that cause errors in the rough draft. And this isn't your final paper. Obviously, errors are going to be picked up in my analysis and my feedback to you. But how about we don't make them in the first place? So in some cases, what students will do is they will write a paper, and it's supposed to be a literary analysis. And somewhere in the middle of that literary analysis, they start making the paper more of a journal because they'll connect with something. They'll be talking about freedom or disappointment or marriage, and then they'll start telling a story about themselves or a story about a friend that went through a similar experience. That's wrong. It's wrong every time in literary analysis. This is about the story of an hour. This paper is only about the story of an hour. It's not a reflective paper. It's not you telling us something in journal form. It's a formal essay. Okay, we have the MLA format, the works cited page, 2 to 3 double-spaced pages, and the works cited page is not included in those 2 to 3 pages. In other words, it can't be 1 page and a works cited page, and you say, okay, there I have 2 pages. It's got to be 2 to 3 double-spaced pages of text. So, if we're good, let's go to a link that I gave you. And this is EasyBib. It's the title page generator. This will do all the work for you, but I just want to review it with you. Sorry, there are ads over to the side. Not much I can do about that, but here we go. So it defaults to the APA style. We do not want that. We want the MLA, Modern Languages Association, 8th edition. What is the title of your paper? So maybe the title of your paper is Freedom in the Story of an Hour. And be sure that when you're citing the short story, you are using quotations around it, and that you have an uppercase T, S, and H. Then you'll put in your first name and last name. Oh, look at that. I'm the student and the instructor. And my name as the professor. You'll put in the course. Okay. And then if you'd like, you can indicate the year and the day and the month. And you hit create, and it brings it right back into Word. And here you are. So unfortunately, I did this in all uppercase, but it should be a mix of upper and lowercase. Right here, this should be lowercase. So these are things I can fix. You know, minor things. Will I take off points for that? No, but I'll notice it, and I'll know to make a note of it to you. So it's just more of a pain than anything else. So if you do this correctly and you use the EasyBib title generator, you've already started your paper. Everything's formatted for you, and you can start writing right after this. So this is where you'd go back and you'd look at the work that you did for your outline. And hopefully, if you have a nice, robust outline, the paper will really start writing itself because your ideas will be there in an organized way. So I was lucky and fortunate enough to go online, and I will link this in the class, and find an example of a literary analysis that actually deals with the story of an hour. So I'm going to pull that up next. Oops, wrong one. And here we go. So you'll notice here right away that this does not look like an MLA heading, and you know, so not everything in a sample is perfect and correct. That's why I showed you the title generator, so you do get it done and formatted correctly. And she starts out with The Story of an Hour is a short story in which Kate Chopin, the author, presents an often unheard of view of marriage. And she works down to what should be her thesis. I should find a thesis statement right here towards the end of your first paragraph, and that thesis statement should answer two questions: so what and who cares? The so what is, what is your essay about? And we know the tip off here, she's going to do something related to disappointment. And she probably should have named, or he, I don't know if it was a male or female who wrote this, he probably should have said disappointment in marriage in the story of an hour. That probably should have been and would have been a better, fuller title for this paper. But right in here towards the end of your first paragraph, I should know what you're writing about, what the topic is, and why it's important that I read this, that any of your readers should read it. So she says, the crushing disappointment kills Mrs. Mallard. And we were debating that last week in the discussion, weren't we? What killed her? And some of you said it was her heart, and some of you said it was the disappointment of having Brentley come home, and some of it said it was just the disappointment of losing him, and you know, so that's up for debate. And then she says, published in the 1800s, the oppressive nature of marriage in the story of an hour may well be a reflection of, though not exclusive to, that era. So that gets me wondering what this paper is going to be about and if she's going to be able to prove that. So next she moves into her first paragraph, and you'll see here that she's using the paragraph style, probably because she had the book in front of her. We don't have paragraphs and page numbers because we're reading this online, so I don't want you to get confused there. She says the narrator knows, for example, that Mrs. Mallard, for the most part, did not love her husband. And she's not using a quote, but she's paraphrasing paragraph 15 of the book. She does ultimately start using a quote. Now we see it at the end of page 1. Mrs. Mallard is held back in her marriage. The lines on her face bespoke repression. Paragraph 8. And she says further down, when Mrs. Mallard learns of her husband's death, she knows that there will be no powerful will bending her. These are both examples of woven quotes or weaves. And please go back and read what I'm doing in the discussions this week, and what your peers are doing, because this is exactly what we're talking about. So, you know, she spends the rest of her paper going through and trying to prove that Mrs. Mallard was unhappy in her marriage and she's disappointed when her husband returns. And many of you picked up on the free, free, free in paragraph 11 of the story. And this writer talks about it as well. So it would be interesting for you to read this and get more ideas. We get down to the end, and again, the conclusion should be a reflection of your introduction, tying up things, stressing main points you made in your essay, and leaving your reader thinking. She says Mrs. Mallard experiences the exhilaration of freedom after she learns of her husband's death in the story of an hour. Later, when she learns that her husband still lives, she knows that all hope of freedom is gone. The crushing disappointment kills her. Where have we heard that before? The oppressive nature of marriage in the story of an hour may well be a reflection of, though not exclusive, of the late 1800s. I don't like the ending. I think that this does not belong there. I think she could have, she should have left us thinking about marriage, but not used her thesis word for word, more or less, in the conclusion. She should draw some kind of conclusion about that statement. It would also be interesting to read the paper and see if she did prove that it's not exclusive of the 1800s, that it didn't only happen in the 1800s. I don't think she really does that, because then she would have to bring in the 1900s, the 20th century, the 20th century and the 21st century, and she doesn't do that in her paper. So you have to be careful that you don't promise your reader something that you can't produce. Your thesis should be something that you're proving. Students have asked me in the past, do you write your introduction first? And I say, not always. Sometimes I write my body paragraphs first to try to get a sense of where I'm going with the essay. I kind of have this loose thesis in my mind. But don't be afraid of writing your essay and writing what I would call a tentative thesis. A thesis that can be changed. You can always broaden it or change it or delete it entirely. You can make it more narrow. So the thesis is something that is the totality of the ideas that you include in your body paragraphs. Okay? And the conclusion introduces nothing new. There should be no new information in the conclusion. What you're doing is concluding. And I always tell my students in class, it's like when somebody says goodbye on the telephone and you're ready to hang up and they go, oh, one more thing. And you're like, wow, geez, I just said goodbye. I wanted to hang up. And then, oh, but another thing. Oh, and I forgot to tell you. And, it's kind of annoying. And it's the same thing in an essay. We don't want to see new information when we're expecting an ending and we're expecting you to tie up loose ends. This does not include a works cited page, so I can't show it to you, but I will put it out there for you to read. It is not a critical essay written by someone who has a doctorate or somebody who's a researcher. This is not expert. This is probably high school level, so maybe English 101 in college, similar to 1105 in our school. So read it for what it's worth. Just get a sense of how to put things together. But be aware that it's not perfect. And I don't expect your rough drafts to be perfect, but the more work you put into the rough draft, the less you have to do for the final. You'll get an idea of where you stand with the rough draft and how much work has to be done. And I'll give you an idea when I read it as to what grade you can expect based on what I'm seeing. And so if you get a B on the rough draft, you know that doing the final draft, you'll, quite possibly get an A if you if you take my advice, the advice that I give you to the feedback that I give you to the rough draft. So I hope this helps, and I'm going to link this for you. And please let me know if you have questions or concerns. I'm here from 9 in the morning until 8 in the evening. The only day that really don't do too much is on a Sunday. And I just ask that we try to keep it to email and a phone call. This way we can we can communicate together, but try not to text message, only because things get misinterpreted in text messages. If it's a quick question, I have no problem with that. But when it gets longer and you need a lot of instruction, let's do that by email so you have something to look back at. But I invite you to call or email at any time. Okay, good luck.